Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about openings. I'm also going to review quickly what I did with my last class because it's just such an important concept. And in chess, a lot of times you got to learn something 4 or 5 times till you really get it. We are going to talk about the quickest mate in chess and make sure that it doesn't happen to us. Actually, technically, the quickest checkmate in chess is the fool's mate, but it almost never happens. Anybody remind me what the fool's mate is? Arjun?
F3, E5, G4, Queen H5, Queen H4, checkmate.
Excellent. Very good, Arjun. So this is the fool's mate. When white plays F3, now you can start with G4, and it's really funny because in my last class, we had a kid who I was explaining why G4 wasn't a good move, and he immediately said, but my dad always plays that against me. But G4 is probably better than playing F3, to be honest. I mean, this move is even worse. Why is this? This is probably one of the worst moves. I think this might, yeah, F3 is probably the worst move you can start the game with. I believe that is true, yeah. Why is F3 like just the worst move you can start the game with? Isabel?
There's an open diagonal and the king's on it.
Yes, the one thing is it's horribly weakening for the king. There's another thing that's terrible about F3.
Line of danger.
That's right, that would be a checkmate. But let me phrase this question in a different way. F4 is not nearly as bad of a move as F3. Why do you think that is? Like F4, it's not what I would recommend, but it's not nearly as bad. Because after F4, you can continue developing at some point with what? Naida?
With the easy move.
Hmm?
With the easy move.
Right, with what move? How could you continue developing here if you were white and you had played F4? What's your name?
Allende.
Allende?
Allende.
Allende. Okay, Allende?
Well, you can move your knight to F3.
Excellent. That is why this move's not nearly as bad. When you put your pawn on F3, not only are you weakening your king, but you're also taking out the best square for our knight, right? When we start the chess game, the one thing we're pretty sure of is that we usually want to move our knights to F3 and C3. Why is that? Why are we so sure of that, AJ?
Because you want to attack the center.
Yes, because we want to attack the center, and there's not that many options for our knights. Our other option is H3, and that's towards the side. And if we put our knight on, if we play something like E4 and then play knight E2, that's not good either, because what does it block? Eli?
Bishop and queen.
Right, it blocks stuff. So this is like, we're almost always putting our knight on F3. So that's why F3 is such a bad move. Okay, but anyway, I just want to go over quickly what I went over with the other class because they had some, because I'm just always surprised by how strong players can be and yet still fall into what we call the 4-move checkmate. So we want to really take that out of the possible. How many people play the move E4? Raise your hand. Me too. How many people play something different? Tristan, you play D4. Is that what you were saying earlier? Okay. D4 is a great move. A lot of great players play it. And Eli, what do you play?
I do it. Shadow.
Okay, so you play your pawn here or something? Okay, that's fine. It's not a bad move at all. It's like when you're starting out, though, a lot of times you want to play more classic. You want to play, just get the center. But I don't mind playing G3. So E4, most of you play that. Now as black, how many of you play this move? Great, all right, this is just a fantastic way to start the chess game, to play E5 against E4. Just both of you are trying to get your pieces out in castle. Now, if your opponent plays his bishop out at this moment, what is the first thing that goes through your mind? Isabel?
The queen can go to F3 and try to mate you on F7.
That's right, so you're already thinking, Isabel, that the queen might come here and attack F7, and that would be mate. And so you can tell that they're going to do that because when they put their bishop out first, that often means that, especially if it's a kid. Because if they didn't want to checkmate you quickly on F7, instead of bringing the bishop out first, what do you think they would do? AJ?
Knight.
Yes, knight where? Can you use chess notation for me?
Yeah, knight F3.
Exactly. They would usually play this move, which is probably the best move in the position. It's the most common. Grandmasters are usually playing this move. Why do you think grandmasters so often develop their knights before they develop their bishops? So the reason that grandmasters develop knights before bishops is simple, because we just talked about it. The knight, we're almost positive where we want it to go, right? We want it to go to c3 or f3 or f6 or c6. Whereas the bishop, it's not so clear. We have a few different options for this bishop. What are some good options for this bishop on f1? Charlie?
C4.
c4 is a good one. Do you have any other ideas, Tristan? c4 is good, but sometimes it goes to another square. Isabel, where else does it sometimes go?
D3.
It doesn't usually go to d3. Why does the bishop not usually go to d3? We're doing a lot of work on openings today. I want you guys to play even stronger moves in the opening. Arjun?
Because it blocks the D pawn.
Excellent. Block the d pawn. Why is that a problem?
Because you can't develop your bishop.
You can't develop your other bishop, and you want to play with all your pieces. Fantastic, Arjun. So that's why bishop d3 is usually not played, unless maybe this pawn's out already. Then putting the bishop on d3 makes a lot more sense, because then we don't have to worry about that bishop. So bishop d3 is really typical. What other move do we see a lot? By the way, black usually defends this pawn, right? This move attacks this pawn, so this one defends. What other move do we see very often in this position besides bishop c4? Arjun?
Bishop B5.
Bishop b5 we see a ton, right? So finally, it's not usually happening in this position, but in a lot of positions, we see a move that Eli mentioned earlier, the so-called fianchetto. You used that word, Eli. What does a fianchetto mean?
The move that usually the first one it would be the G3 pawn, and then the F bishop, and then moving it up to G2.
Excellent, right? And that's something that you sometimes have Grandmaster Yasser Sarouan come in to teach classes. Anybody remember Yasser from kids classes? Fantastic. Well, that's something that Yasser is really good at. So when he comes in, ask him about the fianchetto. Tell him I told you to ask him about it. So when you put your pawn on g3 and you put your bishop on g2, that's a fianchetto, and that's another way to develop in castle, right? It's a little bit more rare. Why do we not like it that much in this position? It doesn't happen that often in this opening with e4. It happens a lot in other openings, but not this one. Why is that? Anybody know why we don't see white fianchettoing here that often? Tristan?
Bishop could move to like if pawn B moves up, the bishop could move to A6 and then move to F1.
Well, that's a great point. For instance, if we already had our pawn here or something, we could maybe in some position play bishop a6 and stop you from castling. The only thing is that's not going to be that effective, because we can block that idea with a move like d3 at the right moment. So I don't think that's the reason. The reason is that, rather, when we have our bishop on a fianchetto, we usually want it to be a strong bishop. Is this a strong bishop, Charlie?
No,
Why not?
because it blocks out. And I think there's one other reason it is bad to fianchetto the bishop. It takes longer to cancel.
Very good. Excellent. You mentioned two important things here. Charlie mentioned that fianchettoing is not his favorite thing because it takes a little bit longer to castle. That is true. That's why you see people do it a lot when they play d4, c4 in the first move, like Yasser Sarouan, who I mentioned earlier, because in that position, the position's less open, so it's okay if you wait a little bit longer to castle. But that's a very advanced concept. Some of you are a little bit more advanced here, so I'm throwing that out there. But the bigger reason, which Charlie also mentioned, is that this pawn here stops the bishop from having a lot of power, right? So bishop, we want to have diagonals just like we want to have our rooks on nice open files, right? So that's the reason that we don't usually see that move. Instead, really quick though, I did want to show you what I showed the other kids. So after bishop c4, we talked about how, like knight c6, white might play something like queen h5. What's the best way to defend here? What's the best way to defend here? All hands should be up, because a lot of kids are going to try this against you, even though you're strong enough. With the guitar, what's your name?
Augustia.
Augustia. Augustia? Hey, no. Let Augustia answer. He had his hands up himself.
The queen must kill the pawn.
Well, that's if it's white's move. If it's white's move, you want to play queen takes pawn. Why is that so great?
Because it's a bad move.
Right, it's a checkmate, right? That's not a bad move. Checkmate's a good move. But if it's black's move, what's the best way to stop that threat? People try this against you because they want to have a quick win. Even if it's not the best way to play in the opening, they'll do it anyway. Isabel?
I would say G6.
Why, G6, why is that your favorite move here? Speaking of fianchettos.
Because it blocks the queen from getting to F7.
Exactly. And then when the queen comes to F3, what's your best move here? Caleb?
F6.
What? Give me a piece before you. Or did you want to play pawn to F6? Okay, knight to F6. When you say F6 and you don't put a piece in front of it, in chess language, that technically means you want to move a pawn there. Does everybody know that? Like if you're watching grandmasters talk about chess and you hear them say F6, it means pawn to F6. So be careful, because when Caleb said F6, I know he meant knight to F6, but because I could tell by the way you were looking at the board. And I know you like to develop your chess pieces, but technically what you said meant F6, right? Now, why is F6 not a good move? AJ?
Because you can pretty much easily get in and kind of.
Yeah, you can pretty much easily attack black's position, because what can black not do once he's played F6? What can he no longer really do, even if he gets his pieces out? Arjun?
Black move is knight to F6.
He can't move his knight to S6, and he can't castle, because even if he develops all his pieces, he won't be able to castle because of what? Yeah, the bishop would be putting him in check. So that's a really bad thing to do then, to move this pawn forward. Whereas the other idea that Caleb really meant, knight f6, is an excellent move, because let's say white plays knight e2 or something. What will black do next? Tell me what black does next. Charlie?
I would do bishop c5.
Actually, I don't like bishop c5 here, and again, this is an advanced concept, but the reason I don't like bishop c5 is because you've already played this move g6, and once you've played g6, you have what we call holes around your king. That means there are squares that are easy for white to occupy. For instance, say I just play my pawn here now, and then you castle, or let's say you don't castle, let's say you play here. Now, what can white do that will stop black from castling for at least a little while? Charlie?
I actually had an idea that black could do other than c6 that white actually do better.
Oh, you wanted to play like,
If that was fine.
I think that you mean bishop takes f2?
Yeah.
But I could take with the queen, and then I don't think you have enough for giving up a whole piece. But my question is, how does white stop black from castling here? Justin?
With the bishop, it takes the pawn on f7.
Well, bishop takes f7 stops you from castling, but the problem is you're giving up a whole bishop and you're only getting a pawn. And when you do that, you want to make sure that you have a concrete follow-up, because that's a big material deficit to go on with the game, okay? So you should always look at moves like bishop takes f7, because sacrifices often lead to great combinations, but only do it if you think you have a good reason for it. Arjun?
Bishop h6.
Bishop h6, excellent. And now see how this never could have happened if you didn't have your pawn here? Right, Charlie? So that's why I didn't like that move, bishop c5. And again, this is more advanced, but it's called holes. You're making a lot of holes in your king. So instead of putting your bishop on c5, I would have put my bishop where? Where should we put our bishop instead here? AJ?
f8. H6.
Nah, well, h6 is possible, but it's like kind of weird because it's not protected. I don't really like putting my bishop in a square where we call this kind of a loose bishop. Bishop g7, who said that? raise your hand, but that is the right move. That is what I like, because now these holes are covered. So the bad part is that the bishop doesn't have a lot of scope, but it's worth it because now we get to castle and our knight is protected and white's queen is not really doing very much, and it's a good position for us, okay? So this is a really important opening line that you need to remember. Don't let your opponent checkmate you early in the game and take advantage of it in a way that allows you to develop quickly in castle. Now, I'm going to go over a very famous opening that a lot of people play, especially at the highest levels. In fact, if any of you get a chance to see some of the games in the World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen, what's that?
It's in India.
It is. It's in India. Very good.
It's November?
In November. Yeah. How do you know all that?
I don't know.
You don't know? You know? Your parents told you?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And do you know who Magnus Carlsen's going to be playing?
Yeah.
Who?
This Indian guy that's name begins with the V-I-S-H.
Excellent. An Indian guy whose name begins with a V-I-S-H. I love it. Arjun.
And his name's Anand.
Anand.
And I have one more thing.
Yes.
And I know where they're playing, which city they're playing.
And you know what city they're playing in? Wow, where are they playing?
Chennai.
Chennai. Okay, great. How do you know that?
My parents told me.
Oh, excellent. Very good. So that's going to be an interesting match, and I'm going to tell you both of these players play this opening. So not only do you see it a lot at the level of Scholastic chess, are any of you playing in the kids tournament after this? Okay, so you're likely to see this move. You're likely to see the Roy Lopez, which is what we're going to look at in the Scholastic match. But you're also likely to see it if you turn on your computer and you look over the games, the World Championship that play next week. I could be wrong. It could be that Magnus Carlsen and Anand decide to play something totally different. But there's a very high chance that we'll see at least one game in that match with the move, the Roy Lopez, one of the most famous openings in chess. Now, how does that start? How does this Roy Lopez, this famous opening, one of the oldest too? Charlie?
In this position, the next
Yes, how do we get the Roy Lopez?
bishop c5.
Bishop to b5, excellent. Why is this move so popular? Anybody here, first of all, does anybody here play this for white? Or do most of you play bishop c4? Okay, so we've got a few hands up. And what's your name in the yellow shirt? Adi, right. Okay, I'm pronouncing that right, Adi? Okay, you play this as white?
I do.
What's that, you also play bishop c4? You switch back and forth?
Or
Okay, well, e2 I don't like as much. It's not as aggressive. I think you should stick Adi to one of these two. How many people play this one? Raise your hand. How many play this one? Very few. Okay, they're both good moves. And, I would pick one and try to master it. And then, you can switch around a little bit. But we're going to look a little bit at bishop b5 today. Now, it's pretty obvious why we play bishop c4, because this pawn we can sometimes capture or put up more pressure on. But bishop b5, what's the reason for this move? Why is that a popular opening as well? Lily?
because it's fair because if the bishop takes the knight, then the other one will get 3 too.
Excellent. Very, very good. If we take this knight off, then this pawn could become weak. Exactly. Did you had something to add, Adi? No? Okay, great. So there's a couple different things that black sometimes plays in this position. Sometimes they play knight f6 right away, and sometimes they play a6 in this position. Now that might seem strange because it's kind of like they're ignoring what Lily just said, right? That this knight could be captured followed by this pawn, right? Let's see what happens if we do that. So if this bishop takes a knight, how do you think black would recapture, right? So we just took a knight. Better do something about that. Ayande, right?
The black pawn can take the bishop.
But you have to tell me which black pawn, because I got 2 black pawns I can take it with.
b7.
Well, b7 is one possibility. But then, after we play, for instance, knight takes pawn, What are you going to do? I mean, you have a way to play here, but it's not as strong as it would be if you had taken with the other pawn. So even though I like your move in principle, there's a general principle. Has anybody heard that you should be capturing towards the center? Anybody heard that? You guys are raising your hand because you've heard that principle? No? The reason you should capture towards the center is the same reason that we develop our pieces towards the center. Usually if you have a choice between captures, like let me give you an example. I'll just make up an example here. Like say this is a position and there's a bishop here. Like this bishop gets out to here somehow and this bishop takes this. As a general principle, which pawn do we take with? Arjun? No. That leaves only one option. Naida?
A7.
Why?
Because that can take a bishop easily.
Right, well, we take with this pawn because it's capturing towards what? Right.
Center.
Exactly, it's capturing towards the center. In this case, it also opens a rook file, which is kind of nice. But the key thing is that now we have more control over the center, and the C and the D pawns are still connected. Whereas if we were to take with this guy, this pawn would actually be isolated, and we'd be going towards the side of the board, which is not what we want to do, right? So I like that Allende played that right principle in this position, but the thing about chess is that there's always a conflict between these rules that you learn and the specifics of a position. Every position is different in chess. For instance, actually my last class, they don't play, they're younger than you guys. The average age is a lot younger, and a lot of them just learn chess. So I talked to them about how the knight on the rim is dim, and one of the parents actually asked me about a position where I put the knight on the rim for a really good reason. And I just explained that you can't get too carried away with these rules that you learn, right? Like in this position, obviously, you're happy to move your knight to the rim and capture a free queen, right? And that kind of thing comes up all the time in chess. If you're winning material, you're happy to capture towards the center, away from the center. So that's why in this position, usually black captures away from the center because they have a really good plan for when the white takes this pawn. What's black's plan here? What can white do, black. What can black do here that's really good? The guitar, I can't remember your name. What is it again? Augustia, right. What can black do here that's really good?
Black pawn goes up move 5.
Well, no, that's not the best move. What happened here basically is, remember, black lost a pawn, right? So we got a bishop, and we want to get our pawn back so that we can have the same amount of stuff that our opponent has, right? We call that material. In the beginning of the game, you always want to try to take off as many of your opponent's pieces as possible, as long as you're not getting mated or anything like that, because that will help you win the game. So we're down a pawn, we want to make it even. Eli? Well, bishop to b4, there's a reason I don't like that move. First of all, you're not getting your pawn back. Secondly, this bishop is really easy to attack with a move like this pawn here. So that's not my favorite. Arjun?
Queen h4.
Queen to h4 is a good idea trying to attack this pawn, but how would I stop you from taking that? Oh, well, I've got a lot of good moves here. But one thing that I would really, really want to do here is, Augustia? Knight to c3 is a really good move. Oh, c4 is not as good because I can take this with check, and then at least I get my pawn back. Knight c3 is a good move. Another move I love in this position, Caleb?
Queen to e7.
Okay, you're talking about black. I'm talking about white now. Tristan? Knight to d3 is not my favorite move here. My favorite move in this position is something that we're always trying to do in chess. Castle, yes. I want a castle here because if you take this pawn off, it's extremely dangerous. Why is that? Just want you to notice something about this. Allende?
Because the king will be in check.
Your king and your queen are in the same file. And that's going to be really dangerous when we move a major piece to where? Arjen?
E1.
Rook E1. And now when you move your queen away, like say you move your queen here, notice how my rook and your king are lined up. Now what could white do? Justin?
Move the knight.
Knight will be a check. Where would you move it to? So there's a little bit of a better move. Isabel?
Knight to G6.
Knight G6. Excellent, Isabel. Knight G6 is a check, and then this rook is also hanging. See that? So that's not right. So that's how do we call that check? Actually, in time for Halloween, I have a special name for it. We got Udi, right.
Discover check.
It's called a discover check. Sometimes I tell people it's called a boo check because you're moving one piece and you're uncovering an attack. And it's like the game that they play with children, peekaboo, right? So Knight G6 check, winning the rook would be very good. So that's why Queen H4 suggested by Arjun was a good idea, but it was not the best move. There's actually a better way to try to regain our pawn here. So what we want to do is we want to use a double attack. I actually have a video on YouTube that I gave for a kids class maybe 6 months ago where I talked about double attacks and how important they are. Anytime in chess you can do two things at once, that's beautiful. Fork, yes. Fork is a synonym for double attack. So can we have a fork here? What?
Wasn't that Nona
Nona?
in the book?
Yes, I think that is. Thank you. Very good. She's talking about my book. Isabel's talking about my book, Play Like a Girl, where I have a whole chapter on double attack. No, I'm looking for a move for black that forks.
Oh,
Yes, a move for black that creates a fork and wins back our pawn. So it attacks two things at once. We got a move here that attacks two things at once. Adi?
Queen D4.
Excellent. Was that what you were going to say, Arjun? Okay, so Queen D4 is very good. What are the two things that attacks at once? Isabel?
Knight and the pawn.
The knight and the pawn, right? And we can't defend both of them at once.
Technically, 4 things.
Well, but it doesn't attack these things because they're protected. So I'm kind of only counting things that were unprotected. Because if we counted things that were protected, then if you're attacking something that's protected, it's not a real attack, especially if it's a queen. Because we don't want to attack something protected with a queen because the queen's the most powerful piece. Does that make sense? So if it's a smaller piece attacking a bigger piece, those attacks count. But in the case of the queen, it doesn't really. All right, so Queen D4, you can't attack both. We regain our pawn, and we're probably going to stop you from castling. Because like if you play here, we check, and you can't castle at a check, right? So that's the whole reason that the main move in the Roy Lopez is to play A6. And now white actually plays bishop A4, and now the two sides continue with their development. You usually see something like B5, attacking the bishop, bishop B3, and then you see positions like this where the position's rather closed. What does a closed position mean in chess? Has anybody heard this word before, a closed position? This is the kind of thing we see happening in the Roy Lopez a lot. This type of position, the rook is usually on E1 so that we can protect E4 earlier. Arjun?
I know what a closed position and an open position.
Okay, well let's start with open.
An open position is when you should develop your pieces quickly.
Okay, very good. In an open position, we want to develop our pieces very quickly. But what defines an open position? How can you tell whether a position's open or closed? There's one really important thing. How do you know this is a closed position? That means there's not a lot of open files or open diagonals. How can you tell? There's one trick that you can tell right away. AJ?
Because the two bishops can't really know.
Well, that's a clue, yes. When the bishops don't have a lot of scope, that usually means that it's a more closed position and that it's more favorable for knights. Excellent. But how can you tell? Arjun?
Because no pieces are traded, so it means that all the pieces are on the board, and then there might not be a lot of space to move.
It's less about pieces and it's more about what else? What creates open files and diagonals? Trading what? When you trade what type of piece does it create open files and diagonals? Eli?
Pawns.
Exactly, pawns. When you trade pawns, it creates an open position. So for instance, imagine if we had all of this off the board. Notice how open it is and how important it is for both sides to castle, right? So that's how you tell the difference between an open position and a closed position. Are there pawns that have been traded? And in this opening, the Ruy Lopez, we see there are no pawns that have been traded in this particular type of variation, and that's why it's closed. And that's why both players are going to play a lot of slower maneuvers instead of the extremely rapid development that we usually see.